Many communities operate from a space of deficit, right? This would be great if only we had X. I'm a bigger fan of doing asset mapping to kind of set out like what can this community and this group of people do that no one else in the world can do? Let's start from that place.
Welcome, Erica Quinn, to the Clarity Compass. Erica, we're delighted to have you. You're an artist. You create culture in communities, and tell us your background that got you into such an identity.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I didn't think about this until recently, but I think my childhood has so much relationship to where we are now. And so I grew up in Whitehaven, Pennsylvania. And when I was a baby, half our main street burned down. So Whitehaven is like 3,000 people, no stoplights, super tiny town, right along the Lehigh River. And when I was a kid, my parents owned an outfitter on the main street in this historic stone building. So I grew up in a downtown mercantile space, and also was very present for watching the struggle of what small business looks like in that space, and then developing into the mind of an artist. So very dreamy, a lot of time in the woods by the river. I'm a photographer and a poet, and I've been making images and writing as long as I can remember knowing how to write. So that work kind of got like stuck in my brain. It's like a curiosity about how communities work, a curiosity about who are the people who make up the community. So when I was in high school, I did a project just for myself, not for school, where I photographed and interviewed people in the town. So I interviewed the 85-year-old lady on town council, and I interviewed the baker and her husband. And, I interviewed the accountant who had restored this Victorian house. And it didn't really go towards anything. It was more just my curiosity, like my interest in who are these people who make up this place? How can I tell that story? And so I've been reflecting on that a lot recently, because in my career now, I'm super involved in especially main streets, downtowns, and thinking about how can we infuse arts and culture as a means of cultivating that sense of place.
Arts and culture. Can you define that?
I have a capacious definition, right? So I will always, of course, it's like, yeah, the gallery and the concert. I think that when I'm saying arts and culture, when I'm saying the arts, I'm really thinking about things that are beyond the traditional, like you go to a museum, you go to a venue. I'm thinking about things like placemaking. I'm thinking about things like public art, but also ephemeral happenings, right? So like, imagine walking through an alleyway and seeing buskers, right? That's arts and culture. Imagine some kind of conversation in chalk on the sidewalk. That, to me, would be part of arts and culture. I think civic engagement, people getting involved in their communities. I think vegetable gardens in an urban space are arts and culture. I think there's these ways that we are expressing and the ways that we are articulating what it is to be human in a public space is what I would consider arts and culture.
Okay.
And that's a wide definition. And I think what I am delighted by is the way for me that keeps changing and evolving and growing.
And so going back to your 15-year-old self, when you interviewed townspeople in that community, how is that town doing today?
It's a really interesting town, so I loved that town. I loved living in Whitehaven. I scarcely left for 18 years. So I had a very sheltered, small view. But for me, it was like also the whole world, right? I've always been so dreamy. And so the woods behind my house was the universe, right? And so I never felt like I was missing out on something. And then after 18, I went away to college, I started traveling, and, and my visual vocabulary grew and grew and grew. But, in that time that I've been gone, it's changed a lot. And actually, I just started working with the Pennsylvania Downtown Center. So that's the statewide nonprofit that works with all of the Main Street programs across Pennsylvania. So I just started working with them this year. And through a program that the PDC puts on with the DCED, which is the Department of Community and Economic Development, and DCNR, Whitehaven is a blueprint community. This came up last year. And so I think it's a 10-year designation where the community is identified as being a place of possibility and a place where there's this cross-section of natural resources and potential for community and economic development. And so now it is so fun to go back to Whitehaven, and I'm volunteering now with my dad. My dad is super civically engaged, as is my mom, and my dad's on the blueprint committee for Whitehaven. And so I'll be working with him to help identify paths to visually or physically with infrastructure make connections between the downtown and the Lehigh River, which is so important to me that I tattooed it on my arm. So my dad was a river guide when I was growing up. My parents own this outfitter. So the river is like very much a part of our lives. My siblings and I all have the same tattoo. And I'm really just following their lead. I'm just there for whatever help is helpful.
So the economic model of your upbringing was renting canoes and rafts and...
For the first few years, yeah. I mean, my dad then was a scientist and worked in pharmaceutical development, which it turns out is a good way to raise 3 kids. And my mom stayed at home with us, and then she's also this like fascinating person, forestry background, went back to school for physical therapy. And they're both so engaged in that town, still to this day. They're just like, they are holding the door open for you before you know that the door needed to be held open. They're awesome.
And so as Whitehaven it's called Whitehaven, right? Is a blueprint of possibility.
Yeah.
And so when you were 15, and so the possibility is to get it back to the level that you felt at 15, and what does that possibility look like?
Something that I think is interesting about Whitehaven, which is the same story across many towns in Pennsylvania, and I think larger than that, but I'll speak just to the state because that's what I'm most familiar with. When I was 15, loved learning about what Whitehaven was like in the 1800s and the 1900s. I didn't have, I think, the cultural language to think yet about like indigenous land and what it was like before that time of like white settlement in Whitehaven, which, by the way, it's not named for white people, which is what I'm told. It's the town founders, Josiah White. What Whitehaven was like, at one point they had several hotels. That is very different from what it's like now. So I don't see Whitehaven as getting back to something, but I do see Whitehaven as growing into what it could be in the 21st century, right? And so for me, and I think this is also in the mind of the DCED and the DCNR, I think Whitehaven is amazing for its natural resources. The Lehigh River runs right along the town. It's part of this historic lock system that's really beautiful and kind of underdeveloped in terms of what access to that looks like or what historic or museum preservation would look like for that natural site. It runs along the D&L Canal Trail. And so since I was in high school, that was a trail always, and there was a shorter corridor of it, but now they've extended it. So I think you can bike between Pittston, PA, and Philadelphia, PA. Fact check me. But that's an amazing, so it's like these routes of connection, which bring us back to the town's founding, right? It's a river town. It's a railroad town. So I really like thinking about how we can work with the outdoor recreation economy to not go back to a thing that was, but how can we like move into what it could be based on those same resources, like that asset mapping.
Okay, so community development, you're working with these towns across Pennsylvania. What are we trying to seek in the possibility of community connection, humans putting their screens down? How does that all play into economic development or even social development of connection?
Yeah, to me, like the economic development piece is almost like something I'm like, oh yeah, if we do this thing, then it actually is good for business. And isn't that interesting? But that's not, I'm led by that kind of social connection or creating something where there's like a human a human flavor, where you walk into some place and you're known, right? Where there's a sense of belonging, where there's this sense of expression and freedom of expression, and one person having an idea and having a space where they can talk about that idea or iterate on that idea. And then the person next to them says, oh, that's a great idea. Actually, I have this idea. What if we do something together, right? I think those things are important for the well-being of a society. I think those things are critical for us to be humans, right? To, again, put down the screen and to be in physical space with people, having an experience, right? To be moved, to find commonality across language or difference through arts and humanities. It's like, that is the common language, right? We can have conversations about a performance or about a question posed in that sidewalk chalk that we might not have had if we're sitting in a board meeting next to each other, right? So I think that the arts and culture piece of it allows for both an expression, but also a way to have these critical conversations. All of that is good for economic development, right? And so it's been an interesting observation of mine. I'm not a finance person. I skated through life with about as little math preparation as I possibly could, and they said it would come back, and then I became a business runner, which I'm sure would shock all of my math teachers at any point. But I never saw a point. I never saw the practical application. And so now I can understand that, national studies show that, like, if you have a public art piece, a mural on your building, you've raised the property values of the adjacent buildings by 20%, right, in most American cities and towns. That's amazing, right? It's not just for decoration. There is also this part of the arts and culture piece helps lift up the economic reality of a community. And that's just one fraction of an example.
How would you measure the social connection of a community like Whitehaven, or we're here in Happy Valley, State College, Pennsylvania, in the shadows here of Penn State, and a downtown community, and with the Walmartization, Sam's Club, Costco's, that small towns, and that's part of your craft here and working in Pennsylvania, is to bring back that third spot, the barber shop, the coffee shop, the downtown library, so what are you seeing on the sustainability and how you mentioned Whitehaven on the rails to trails along the river and things, but what brings back the heart of a small town?
I mean, people are at the center of it, right? And I think that's another thing that's exciting to watch, again, from the outside with the Whitehaven's Blueprint community experience that I'm thrilled that's happening, is that there are people who are movers and shakers who are saying this is, not every moment is the right moment for something like that, right? And I certainly have, in my career, have had moments where I'm like, I could go for this opportunity for my community or my organization, but is this do we have the right things in place, right? The right people, the right financial resources, the right capacity. I think the people part is really important, especially in a small place. 1 or 2 people make a gigantic difference, right? Now we need to make sure that those 1 or 2 people are well supported, and sustainability is part of what that looks like, because as any of us who have lived in smaller communities know, and I would say even within some scenes in cities, right? There's like, if the person carrying the torch gets tired or gets sick or gets hit by a bus or gets a different job or just gets burnt out, there's a dip, right? And so it's like my work and passion is really centered around observing what is going on and how can we move these things forward, but also support those people who are carrying those torches that are making communities different. So I think that, like, the right people, the right place, the right resources. I also think many communities operate from a space of deficit, right? This would be great if only we had X. We're missing this, and it's the same conversations at every town council meeting. I'm a bigger fan of doing asset mapping to kind of set out, like, what can this community and this group of people do that no one else in the world can do? Let's start from that place, right? And think about, what are the incredible resources? How are we wealthy, right? A town like Whitehaven has suffered from tons of economic dips, tons of this lack of stickiness in terms of keeping retailers in the downtown Main Street space, not uncommon across Pennsylvania and not uncommon across the US.
In cities too.
In cities too. And so rather than say, we can't keep a restaurant, or, we don't have enough wealthy citizens doing X, Y, or Z, let's really, and I think this is applicable to every community, every block of this country, is like, what do we have that no one else has? I think we really need to take asset mapping seriously and like not come to a community or a challenge with this idea of like we are already in the red on what we're trying to do here. I think that there are, and this is like just has borne out so many times in my life, like there are just amazing interactions, conversations, movements, initiatives at small and large scale that can only happen with a particular group of people at a particular place at a particular time. And so I think that can be scaled to every budget size. If your budget is 0, let's have a conversation about what that work can look like. If your budget is 3 million, let's have a conversation about what that work can look like. They're going to be different answers, but I think there's so much possibility in people committing to changing a place.
And so with your expertise, subject matter expertise, when you look at any community, and let's look at Happy Valley here in State College, the benefit of having live music venues in our community and the challenge of maintaining them, and what your experience is from consumers who I've heard say that they live here because of such things. And then when these things go away, it has them move away in a sense. And what are some of the phrases you hear about the impact of live music or the arts in general? Yeah. And why is it so misunderstood on its economic impact or the why to it all?
Yeah, well, I would first say I never would claim to be an expert because I feel like I'm learning. I'm learning every day, right? And so I think that there's not a, So I'll just add that as an asterisk. So
Okay.
no capital E expert. I think a curious person, right? I'm a perpetually curious person, who is learning and changing and growing every day. I think, people like having stuff, right? And there's a certain degree to which that is fine, right? It's like you can be moving through your town, and if you're seeing live music happening, or you know that it's happening, or there's public art and you like it, that's one very outer ring level of engagement.
Eric, explain what Manny's is.
Yeah, Manny's is awesome. So when I was the executive director of Three Dots, we did a lot of collaboration with Corey Elbin of Grinto Productions, and that was one of our incubation projects, right? There's a number of artists and community organizations that we've helped move into brick and mortar spaces. Manny's is the most recent one. And so in January of this year, 2025, Corey was able to have previously grown the audience big enough that it demanded its own brick and mortar space. And so he took over the site of the former saloon in downtown State College and Heister Street, long vacant, opened it up, and really, cleaned it up really beautifully, put in a disco ball. And now 4 to 5 nights a week, there's amazing international music, exploratory music, experimental music, salsa dancing, comedy. It is this like bustling site of connection, and it's becoming a third space to people in the community. And so, amazing touring acts coming from literally all over the world. And it's also kind of the home base for initiatives that we've worked on together, like Roni Mead Fest, these bigger things, and then it has a permanent place to land. So don't be a stranger. Come visit.
That's wonderful.
Always I'm in these spaces whether overtly or not, I'm always there in kind of a quasi-working capacity. So I'm there early. I'm maybe like doing some social media posts or finishing writing something, and I'm kind of just like waiting for the show to get going. And there's a moment at which you're like, I'm closing the computer. Like, okay, now I feel moved to be part of this room right now. And then I'm observing, right? I'm observing, the 3 grad students who have never been there before, who are each Spanish speaking, who feel seen, right? Who feel seen by what we've offered and said like, what else do you have coming up? Like, this is amazing. And they're speaking in Spanish with the musician at the end of the performance, right? And I love when I don't know what's going on, right? Because I'm like an ignorant English speaking person, but I can just see the joy and like oh, like we can like let our shoulders down because we can just speak to each other like fluidly right now. It's Phil who's 90. I'm sitting with him at the back of the bar, and he's like, "That's a really good, really good thing." And that particular musician, he opens his home to the traveling musician, so that musician's staying with him, and he's getting to know him after the show. He's like, "We don't need to hang out now because actually we're hanging out later." And then we like help Phil out to his car. It's the person whose heart is broken, and then I see them like on the dance floor, just like totally losing themselves. And like, the person who is this like amazing part of our community, who's, this amazing artist who's never had an art show before, and he has his art show opening there next week. So he's in the corner drawing. Like, it is all of these people in orbit together, right? And these lives that are like physically bumping up against each other. That wouldn't happen if you just stayed home and watched TV. And like, I love watching TV, the like one day a month that I do it. But it is so valuable to be with human beings in public space, right? And I think that's the transformational aspect.
And as you know, that's the biggest challenge to the world right now. There's an epidemic of loneliness, and statistics are skyrocketing, and here you are helping local people bump into each other, humanity, social capital, which is lacking in any town, USA, and you're carrying the torch for it. Tell me about the challenge of that torch to actively want to connect human beings in a sense of community in their own hometowns. And you're the doctor, and we're working, carrying the torch to help cure a quantifiable disease of loneliness.
Yeah.
And here you are providing this act last night. 40 people were there. And I'm a marketing guy, so I'm always thinking there should have been 160 people there. That's, 180, and I feel bad that my ability to reach the community did not lure more people because they missed out on a transformational feed the soul evening of leaving with that warmth that can sustain you going forward.
Yeah, and I think for that, some of it is thinking about like how many times per week can we ask our audience to come out, right? And how many times per week can we offer shows that draw people from other communities? Then the other part would be like whether the room is, you can't get to the bathroom because it's just too jammed, or this would be like a 40 is like on the smaller side of a show that we would offer. I would say the experience is the same. The people who are there are like stars and eyes, right? And so I guess for me, it's transformational regardless of number. I mean, obviously at the end of the year, we need the numbers to balance. We need to know that there's the vote of the community to keep going in this direction. But yeah, I think that's always been my experience, and I might be missing the other part of the question.
No, the art, art versus corporate America in a sense, in the moniker of a starving artist, so I'm just fascinated in the art community, and it's always the first grant to get cut. It's always the most least appreciated, and historically, why is that? And what are we missing as taxpayers even on not wanting to support something that is so important to why we live in a place? And yet we don't appreciate it, it seems.
I think there's two reasons for that. I mean, one is I think there's a misunderstanding of how critical arts and culture are to the real business appeal of a community, right? That we are a reason people stay. So yeah, I can tell you that like if someone comes to a downtown performance, they'll spend on average $31 in the downtown community and, multiply that over X number of people in a year, blah, blah. I can tell you that, in a downtown community, people will spend, if you think about like your annual folks coming in, I can give you the kind of parking revenue projection for what that would look like for the town. And I can give you these like economic indicators. The things that are a little harder to quantify, and this is where we get into what are more holistic means of thinking about economic data reporting, which I was just having a conversation with a funder in Philly about this. Like, how can we say, this person told me that they live here because of this, and they're going to live here for the next 30 years? Like, what does that economic data look like? Because arts and culture work, like the work that I push in communities across the state, is what makes a place sticky, right? And it's without that stickiness, you slip away at some point, right? And it's not just that it's nice to look at, or it's nice to have, or it's a cultural asset or an amenity, or I can do a fun thing on the weekend. It's also about belonging. It's also about seeing yourself represented, right? So it's also like a diversity in programming, making sure that your community's cultural ecosystem is reflecting the vision of what your community is. And so I think that's like why I've been really supportive of the Secret Planet series in particular, and of the work that I've done in my time at Three Dots is like, okay, how can we expand the representation of what arts and culture activities are offered here, right? Because I'm seeing that there's these amazing things happening, but I'm also seeing that there's a lot of people who don't see themselves here, right? We have a very global community. We have an increasingly queer community, and there are not necessarily spaces or parts of the prism that are kind of entering those identities into kind of like a mainstream space, right? Or I would say even like my work with experimental musicians, like there are lots of other people doing these awesome things. And so how can we be doing a different thing that's part of this larger ecosystem? So we're not replicating, we're not in competition with, but we're growing together, like, coalition building with. And so that's been a big part of at least the work that I've been personally involved in. The other part I would say, and this is like more philosophical and maybe something I'm more angry about because it's 2025, I think the arts are threatening because it's expression, it's human flourishing. I think arts and humanities are the first things to go because they are tellers of truth. They're a mirror to society. And to silence those voices is politically prudent. And I think that has been something across time, that has been something across country. And it's certainly a part of the cuts that we're seeing now, right? Like voices raised in some kind of expression is threatening to regime of power, right? And so I think that is also the other part of it.
Okay, well, let's run with that a little bit because, one of my favorite strategic filters is heart or love versus fear. So extrapolate a little bit on your comments about how the arts or humanities can be intimidating to fear-based mantras and need to be silenced.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you don't necessarily like what people have to say, right? And if you're asking people to stay in a certain lane or in a line or to be so distracted that they don't have time to think of themselves as human beings, that tends to have that tends to be good for the people making money.
Okay. So
is one part. But I also think that just thinking about the way arts and humanities works within a community, say State College, right? It's and I think this comes back to something I mentioned earlier, through those vehicles, we are able to have conversations that we cannot have otherwise, right? So there was a show that we did at Three Dots, I think 2 years ago, and it was a group from South Africa. They were out on the patio. It's the annual block party vibe. Town's crowded. We're spilling out into the sidewalk. And I am watching, because I'm always at the back of the room or the back of the thing, just kind of observing, seeing what people do, which is then how we tweak things the next time. And I'm watching a local organizer for Black Lives Matter and a lot of social justice movements next to someone who I know is a very hardcore Trump voter, super Republican, very, very conservative. And they are standing next to each other dancing. And I was like, we've done it. Like there are ways that we can find understanding and cross silo to, like, we are human beings. We all want the same things, right? We want security, we want love. And my perspective is that if you are leading in a way that's malicious to other people, in whatever that means in your life or in your workplace or in your political reality, that you are doing so because you are feeling scarce about achieving one of those things that you need, right? And so if I think about arts programming, especially in a rural context where there's a lot of bridges to gap, we hear people say here, this is the most diverse place I've ever lived, or this is the whitest, least diverse place I've ever lived. And they're both correct. Like, my work is how can we build something that allows those people to come together in ways that they would never have otherwise, right? How can we approach things with love and curiosity and playfulness? And I think arts and humanities are a perfect vehicle to do just this. And then all of a sudden you're standing next to somebody that you do not agree with. And that maybe the next step is we're able to have a really interesting conversation or just get to know each other better, right? And I think that is, I do not think division is helpful. I do not think that othering is helpful. And my personal philosophy is that through using this really like heart-led process, and again, this capacious definition about what arts is, right? Because it could be your vegetable garden. It could be your wildflower garden. It could be your, kind of, maybe you once a month do a pizza party for your neighbors and you all take over the sidewalk. Like, that's part of it too. That's a way to build, I think, a more resilient community. I think a more forward-facing community and a more empathetic community, which is more based in love and not based in fear.
Well, historically, how have we done it historically? Was it the town square? Was it the grist mill? Or, what were the gathering things that are missing today that you're carrying the torch to bring back?
I think the third place is really important, right? And that's such a buzzword. Like, I don't know that that word necessarily denotes what I want it to, because it's so much more spiritual for me than that. It is like, have you ever like walked into a place and you're just like, oh, this place is different, right? And it could be a coffee shop or a cafe. It could be a place like Three Dots, like an arts and culture center. It could be a place like Manny's, a venue where you feel at home. It's like the place where it's like your living room.
Like a barbershop.
Yeah. Like
Federoff's downtown.
Yeah, for sure. And so it could be the public square. I mean, I do think that there is a lack of spaces to gather. And so one of the things I'm interested in is like, again, because I'm so curious about how can we not demolish everything and make a public square? How can we like do this 10% right now, right? And so maybe it's like finding a wall that needs like a little bit of something, and you like work with your neighbors to figure out what that little bit of something is. Maybe it's a little mural, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, people are like tending to this thing. How can I be there? But I think it's also these spaces where it's like, I worked for a long time as a bartender at a bar in Huntingdon called Boxers, which is also like this amazing site of community organizing in that community. And you walk in, the whole bar turns, everybody knows you.
It's like Cheers.
It's amazing. And like, that was my living room, right? My living room has changed over time, but I've always had a living room that's outside of my actual home. And that's where some of the most surprising conversations and friendships start. And those are the things that I'm like, I can't move because actually I have this whole sticky thing here, right? And I can't get that in the same way in a different place. And so that's part of what keeps me tethered to a community, is thinking about like all of the amazing people who are in my living room every night. Like, oh, it's incredible. And I think that can change. I think those sites have a little bit of mutability within a community, and people can have different ones that are of meaning. And I think that's great. And I think it's ask your friend what their living room is and go visit them in their living room. Like those, and I think church, maybe it was that for a lot of people. And I think it's coming back in that way. But, I grew up in the Catholic Church, and I'm not religious now, deeply spiritual. And I think a lot about like, where is this like sanctified? How can I like be in a sanctified space too? Like, so I don't know, something between church and living room is what I want a new word for third place to be. But I don't know.
Wow, that's great. And the third place, you mentioned religions making a meaningful comeback, especially young people
Yeah,
are
for
leaning
sure.
heavily in.
Yeah, because we're looking for belonging and we're looking for meaning, right?
Yeah,
And I would say I'm seeking the same thing.
meaning, belonging, purpose, relationships. Those are the sticky things that keep you to a community. The plight of the locally owned restaurant. They're under attack in any town, USA, even in the cities. To be a locally owned, non-corporate run chain is a challenging, sustainable challenge. What is this going to mean to stickiness and the sense of community in any town,
A
USA?
restaurant is so important. Yeah, I mean, a locally owned restaurant is so important. I think back to my childhood in Whitehaven, that my living room, or my, I guess my parents' living room, and I was just kind of along for the ride, was the Ugly Mug, right? And I mean, and they have had a real challenge. I forget what year it closed, and iterations of things have happened in that space since then. I believe it's still vacant. And that was where you go in, and it's like your first grade teacher and the guy who owns the thing around the corner and your neighbor are like all at the bar, and you walk in and your friend's family is at the table next to you. And, that was such a third place for that community. And I think there are some still, but especially in a town that small, the loss of one of those is devastating, right? And I think every community needs like a locally owned restaurant and a coffee shop, minimum.
Well,
right?
and the plight of the local newspaper.
Totally.
Does a lot of local newspapers are becoming nonprofits.
Yeah.
Does the local restaurant become a nonprofit?
That's an interesting question.
What is,
and certainly people are playing with that or thinking, I think about like what our friend Liz is doing out in Pine Grove Mills, Liz Grove, the way she's playing with local venues, local arts, local restaurants, and local farming initiatives, and kind of blending those things together, I think is very interesting work. And I would invite, like, not how we can go back to a thing, but again, how we can, like, okay, what do we have here? And what is the gap towards what we know this could be? And what are different ways that we can work together, right? In ways that are unusual, ways that are different from what you might have imagined before. And so maybe it is like, how do we pair arts and farming? How do we pair food and culture, right? I think those maybe are ways to think about how we can build a more resilient community, because especially in rural spaces and small communities, there's 5 people wearing 15 hats each, right? And so it's like, it's not necessarily like in a city where you're like, well, we'll do this thing with these people because there's 15 of them each. It's like there's only a few people and they're all holding a lot. So I guess my question, and I don't know that I have the answer to it, is how can we work together, not against each other in a scarcity mindset, but in a mindset of abundance, to say, okay, we have a common opportunity to do this thing. This is something that we've identified as something that we want to make happen. So how can we bring the perspective that we each have to that conversation or that challenge?
And being someone advocating exactly what you just laid out, what are the challenges to people cooperatively working together? You talk about farmer co-ops. You're talking about communities coming together versus competing against each other in a scarcity mindset. For the all boats would rise if we could align ourselves better, and all boats would rise.
I think some of it is the framing, right? So if you already feel under-resourced for real reasons or reasons that are of your mind, it is very hard to start from that point, right? And so it's like acknowledging the difficulty and I think the relative privilege of the folks at the table, like to really come together and be honest about what that looks like. But if we're trying to work towards a common good or a common goal, or if we've said like, we want this place to be sticky. Okay, how do we approach that from a business perspective, a farming perspective, a food perspective? Like, how can we each kind of come to that common question? But I think if we're doing that from a place of scarcity, that's a really hard starting point. So it's like building trust, building genuine relationships. Go to the stuff the other people are doing. Like, if you want to work with a farmer, show up at the farmer's market, like talk to them, right? So it's like, we can't, as culture bringers, bearers, whatever, like ask you to come to our show if we didn't go to yours. Like, I think that same thing exists within the wider ecosystem if you get outside of your like little pocket. So it's like developing genuine relationships, I think helps to chip away at that scarcity mindset. And I also think like check your ego at the door, right? I think my personal approach is one of stewardship, right? So I'm thinking about like, how can we best steward this movement, this initiative, this community, this idea in a way where, and it's hard, right? Because it's like we are so a part of the things that we do. But if we can really uncouple what that ego piece looks like, I think that's also leading with love instead of fear, right? The fear is that I'm not good enough. I'm not this enough. I'm not that enough. I need to make my mark. I need to do my thing. And what if our goal was instead to be like, I want to go through this day and make like a really great connect. I want to have a great conversation today. I want to live out my values in the way that I'm working instead of getting the gold star and the head pat that I'm really like. And so then that's again, my child self is like, I just want to do a good job. And really just like allowing, we are so human. It is so human to want to serve that ego side of ourselves. But it's like at least my personal philosophy that I'm not interested in partnering with ego and I'm not interested in bringing ego to the table.
And so the podcast is called Clarity Compass. And certainly you've just laid out a very, very clear philosophy, operating system, North Star. And would you say, I guess my question is, number one, is your parents' outfitting business still in business?
No, it closed.
They closed.
They
okay.
closed when I was a kid.
Okay. And then number two, would you say...
But we still have great T-shirts.
That's great.
Yeah,
and unbelievable memories. And it's given a kind of a core essence to who you are.
Big time, yeah.
And, so this operating system that you developed, North Star, alignment, aligning kind of your identity and your role, what has been the secret to that? Has it been the artistic approach, philosophically, in the yin and yang of, I'll say, artistic versus corporate? How did you come upon what seems to be a very strong North Star that pulls you forward every day and doesn't hold you back, that you seem to have been able to mitigate the fear aspects of our operating systems? Like what has been your advice to our listeners and viewers today on how you have come upon a GPS system that is...
One of the things is that I'm not risk averse, and that might not be good.
That's hey, fail fast, fail forward.
Yeah,
you embrace that?
I think I tend to be pretty optimistic. I tend to feel like I really trust in process. I trust in long arcs. I trust in principles of recovery and regeneration, right? And so those are like, that's part of it, right? If I feel like I am living things in a way that is in line with my values and doing kind of a daily, like, okay, what went well today? What would I change? How can I be a better and like more empathetic person, and then also like have myself be included in my realm of empathy? Because I think that's my thing. Like, I can be very nice to a lot of people and sometimes not nice to myself. But I think in general...
How did you learn that?
How did I learn?
How did you learn that you have empathy for others, but it starts with empathy for oneself? Where do you pick that up?
I mean, I have a rigorous therapy practice. So,
okay.
Yeah, deeply in therapy. I have been for a very long time. I mean, I'm also just a very like introspective person, and I get a lot of meaning out of people, readings, books, groups that help challenge or ask questions about my internal self. And I think that helps me also understand other people in a way that I find valuable and is just a part of who I am and what makes me tick. I love people. I'm super curious about them. I'm very interested in the way that we grow and change over time. And I'm also increasingly curious and like, oh, I've always been the same person. Like, I'm almost trying to get back to that child, right, in a lot of ways. And then like remember to make her dinner, because sometimes she's like, I'm so hungry. But yeah, I think it's almost been a process of uncovering all of the stuff that I added after age 8. and like coming back to the person who I was, who was like deeply dreamy, deeply loving, deeply expressive, deeply curious, and really funny, and just like an exploratory person. And to approach the world with the curiosity of that child is to, like, I used to teach elementary school art. It was like a total deviation from my professional career. I was like not trained to do this. I love children, but I went and I was like, hello, children. Now we will be doing art together. I was totally untrained. And so it's actually kind of funny because tomorrow I'm going to this Pennsylvania Art Educators Conference and speaking about Runnymede Fest with my colleague Ann Holt, which is awesome. But that's another deviation. I'm going to be in this room full of art educators. But I loved that work because it was, children are the smartest people you know. They know it all already. And then we forget it. And so it's like, how can we come back to, like, we're all in these like adult clothes sitting around the table together. We are all just children, right? At some level. So
what beats that childhood out of us? And like you said, you're in a rigorous therapy aspect to become that 8-year-old Erica again. Mm-hmm. So in your analysis, what has stripped us of that childhood-like innocence that causes the dissonance? Is it that, artists being emotional, expressive, we're taught through schooling and things, be more functional, be more practical, strip out
be
that.
Productive.
Yeah, be productive,
Yeah.
So what have you figured out has been the duality there that you want to like lean back into who you really are versus what perhaps education and the operating system of operating to excellence has stripped out of us?
Capitalism. No, I mean, it's always capitalism, but
It's
I think a lot of it is fear, right? Like I hadn't thought about that until sitting across from you and kind of, reflecting on that framing, which I think is so beautiful that you do. But I think it is fear. I think it's trauma, right? Like things happen to us in the time between then and now that, kind of make us carry around bigger bags. And so learning what to be able to put down is a perpetual process. I put a big thing down and I'm like, oh, I put it down. And I'm like, oh God, there's this whole other thing. Right. So I'm just like always cleaning the emotional gutters. But I think it is, fear, trauma. And I think it is like this, working with college students, which was my like act before the act that I'm in now, is like they go through K through 12 being told exactly what to do and how to do it. And then they get to college and we ask them to think and they're like, what are you talking about? So I just think that there's so many, I think we should be like nurturing that spirit of curiosity along the way and really thinking about like, again, in the same way that you would have a different conversation with people at this table, if we reset the table with 6 different people tomorrow, that's a whole different conversation. You are also, in a way, able to make an impression, make a piece of art, write a poem, have an idea for a community project, raise your hand at a civic meeting. And you're going to do that way different than I would do it. You're going to do it way different than the person next to you. You are going to do it different than your dad and your kid. You are going to do it in your own way. And so I think it's getting back to that part and knowing like what contribution like one person can make in a community is really important.
Well said. And you said you have taught here at Penn State and you still teach here at Penn State.
I do. Yeah. So I taught and advised in the Stuckman School of Design with architecture, landscape architecture, and graphic design students. Now, and I left to become the ED at 3 Dots in 2021, which I just hung up my, whatever the thing is that I hung up. I hung it up.
Okay.
And I still support the Oregon Mentor. And I'm excited to walk along their next iteration of self. But right now I'm teaching primarily on World Campus and I'm doing some resident instruction too. So I teach Introduction to International Art. I'm going to teach a new art course next semester. I helped co-write some coursework in arts administration around fundraising and grant writing. So
that's great. And you mentioned how K through 12 syllabus driven, optimized children, You get them to college and they have to think, but even college is very much optimized and syllabus driven.
And college is becoming increasingly optimized and syllabus driven,
Yes.
which I have a concern for where higher ed is headed.
Well, I have a big concern with the, AI coming in, and so I want to end a little bit with your thoughts on education traditionally, as I'm told in faculty meetings, is we teach head, hand, and heart. However, head and hand is what we've taught for the last 100 years. Heart, we don't teach. And I challenge that. How have you infused teaching heart, or what is the future of education? We're going to have to learn how to teach heart. How would you go about that? Or is that what the art has done, is taught heart?
I think back to, when I was working in the design school, I did this program that I loved with the landscape architecture department, where once a semester I would go abroad to Germany with the 4th and 5th year students. And they're there for the whole semester. I would plug in for a week or 10 days or something, and I would do this site design module. I am not a designer. I am this broken cameras, abstract, quasi-hallucinogenic poem writer person, but I'm so interested in articulation of space, place, memory, and meaning, right? And so that's how I'm coming to that work. That's the foundation of my personal artwork practice. And so I would take these super high-level students. They're about to graduate. They are so good at making digital renderings. They will they will knock your socks off. And I would be in the classroom with them day one and be like, think about a memory from your childhood. It was just it just became very emotional and very you are being asked to make work that no one else can make. The AI robot, for all of its utility, and I don't think it's a bad thing. I do think it's something to keep your eye on. But it's not able to answer that question. It's I am asking you to make personal meaning in space. I'm asking you to go to that square that you're being asked in this class to redesign. And I want you to go meet someone there and ask them, what is an important place in this site? Go to that place with them and photograph it. Bring that photograph back. How can you work with all of your classmates to make a map of these sites of meaning? That's my approach to undergraduate and graduate education. And it is truly based in the heart. And then I was making these kids do these I made this string collage, and this is everything that we made was messy and unfinished and imperfect and perfect.
Well said, and great way to end. But I do have to ask you what does the word capacious mean?
Oh, God. You're not the only person in my life who's asked me this question. I love the word capacious.
Explain exactly so I can take that into the woods and put it in my vocabulary.
I mean, the Merriam-Webster, no, I don't. I think when I'm using the word capacious, I'm thinking about this all-encompassing, and in my mind, ever-growing, right? And it's a good thing. It's a big thing. You can't put your arms all the way around how good and big it is.
Wow. Okay. Well, we'll end with that. Erica, thank you. It's been a wonderful,
thank you, Greg.
wonderful time together.
What a pleasure. Thank you, Sa'ida.
Appreciate it. Give you a handshake. Okay, thanks. I'm Greg Woodman. This has been the Clarity Compass. Thank you for listening.